26 centuries ago, a man fell face down on the banks of the Tigris River, trembling so violently that he could not stand. He was not weak. He was not afraid of men or armies or kings. He had survived the lion's den. He had interpreted dreams that reduced emperors to silence. But what he saw that night broke something inside him. He described a creature that had no name in any human language: iron teeth, bronze claws, 10 horns, and eyes that burned with cold intelligence. He wrote it down, sealed the scroll, and told his readers that the vision was meant for the end of days, not for his time. Picture the scene. A court of nations gathered under fluorescent lights, voting on frameworks that would bind every government on Earth to a single set of rules. Satellites overhead, tracking movement across every border. Digital wallets replacing paper money in cities from Shanghai to Stockholm. Algorithms scanning speech for dangerous ideas. A network of control so vast, so seamlessly interwoven into daily life, that most people living inside it cannot see its shape, just as a fish cannot see the water. This is not a conspiracy drawn on a whiteboard. This is infrastructure. It has addresses, budgets, spokespeople, and legal frameworks signed by heads of state. And in the last 30 days, 7 distinct pieces of it clicked into place with a precision that would have made Daniel reach for his pen. The prophet did not describe a single nation or a single tyrant. He described a system, something that would grow out of all previous empires, absorb their methods, and exceed their reach by an order of magnitude that previous generations could not have imagined. He called it the 4th beast, and he said it would be different from everything that came before. Not just more powerful, different in kind. A new category of dominion, one that would not conquer land, but conquer identity itself. The ability to buy, to speak, to worship, to exist within the structures of civilization. For 2,000 years, readers called that description symbolic. Then the 21st century arrived and started building it. What follows is not speculation. It is not theology dressed as fear. It is a careful, documented account of 7 events, all verified, all public, all occurred within the last 30 days, that align with stunning precision to the specific characteristics Daniel recorded in the 7th chapter of the book that bears his name. Each signal examined alone could be dismissed. Together, they form a pattern so coherent, so sequential, so consistent with a 2,600-year-old text that the only honest response is to stop, to look, and to decide what you believe about where history is heading and how much time remains. Daniel did not hesitate when he described the first 3 beasts. In Daniel 7, verses 4 through 6, he gave them forms that could be recognized even across centuries. A lion with eagle's wings, a bear raised on one side, a leopard with 4 heads. Symbols, yes, but anchored in something familiar, something the human mind could grasp. And then everything changed, because when the 4th beast emerged from the sea, the language broke down, as if reality itself had slipped beyond description. He wrote that it was dreadful, terrifying, and exceedingly strong, but those words feel like fragments of a larger truth that could not be fully spoken. Iron teeth that devoured and crushed, leaving nothing intact, not even the memory of what once stood. It trampled the residue with its feet, as if destruction alone was not enough, as if erasure was the true objective. And then comes the most unsettling detail of all. Daniel does not compare it to any animal. He does not say it looked like anything known to man. Why would a prophet who had just described 3 symbolic creatures suddenly lose the ability to compare? Now stop for a moment and consider that question carefully. Why would the text become so vague at the exact moment it should have been most precise? Could it be that what he saw had no equivalent in his world? Or more disturbing still, could it be that he was not meant to describe it fully? In the Hebrew text, the word used carries a sense of overwhelming fear, not just visual terror, but existential dread. This was not simply a kingdom rising. This was something that altered the order of things. And yet, the vision does not end there. Daniel 7 verse 7 tells us that this beast was different from all the others that came before it, and that it had 10 horns. 10, not randomly chosen, but deliberate, structured, almost architectural in meaning. In ancient Hebrew thought, horns represented power, authority, dominion. So this was not chaos. This was organized force. And here is where the pattern begins to deepen, because Daniel is not just seeing a creature, he is witnessing a system. Think about the progression. The first beast rises, then the second, then the third, each representing empires that history would later confirm. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, empires of flesh and blood, of kings and armies, of walls and territories. But the fourth does not behave like an empire confined to geography. It devours the whole earth, according to Daniel 7, verse 23. The whole earth, not a region, not a continent. Everything. Does that sound like anything that existed in Daniel's time? Now here is where things begin to shift in a way that many overlook. The text says this fourth kingdom will be different from all others, and that it will consume, trample, and break the entire earth into pieces. That is not conquest as we understand it. That is transformation. That is restructuring reality itself. And if you read it again slowly, you begin to notice something unsettling. There is no mention of borders, no mention of resistance, only total reach. So let me ask you something directly. When in human history has there ever been a system capable of reaching the entire world at once? Not through armies, but through presence. Not through invasion, but through integration. Because if such a system did not exist in the ancient world, then Daniel was not describing his present. He was seeing something far ahead, something that would only make sense to those living in a very different kind of civilization. But here is the detail that many pass over too quickly. In Daniel 7, verse 8, as the horns are being considered, another horn appears, a little one, rising among them. It uproots 3 of the original horns, and it has eyes like a man and a mouth speaking great things. Intelligence, voice, influence. This is no longer just structure, it is consciousness embedded within the system. And suddenly, the vision is no longer about beasts or kingdoms, but about something that watches, speaks, and reshapes power from within. Now imagine Daniel seeing this unfold without the framework we have today. No language for networks, no concept of global systems, no understanding of artificial intelligence or interconnected structures. And yet he describes something that sounds less like an empire and more like an organism, something alive in its function, adaptive in its reach, and relentless in its expansion. Could it be that what he saw was not meant for his time at all? And this is where the silence becomes louder than the words. Because after describing this fourth beast, the text does not fully explain it. It moves on, as if the reader is left to wrestle with something incomplete. But is it incomplete, or simply waiting for the right moment to be understood? Because prophecy, by its diet, often reveals itself only when the conditions align. So hold on to that thought, a beast that cannot be named, a kingdom without borders, a power structure that consumes everything and leaves nothing untouched, and within it, a smaller force that speaks, observes, and changes the balance from the inside. Does that feel like something ancient or something uncomfortably familiar? Because what comes next will begin to connect these fragments in ways that are difficult to ignore. And if Daniel saw it thousands of years ago, but could not fully describe it, then maybe the question is not what he meant. Maybe the question is why it is becoming visible now. Because once you begin to recognize the pattern, once the pieces start to align, the uncertainty fades, and in its place, something far more unsettling begins to take shape. Something that has been here longer than we realized. Parte 1. Finalizada. Con 1,328 palabras. Most people who have heard of Daniel's four beasts assume the fourth one is Rome. It is the default answer in seminary classrooms, in Bible commentaries, in Sunday school curricula that have been printed and reprinted for decades. Rome had iron legions. Rome crushed everything in its path. Rome divided into 10 territories after its fall, which seems to match the 10 horns neatly enough. The interpretation is clean, it is teachable, and it has the comfort of pointing to something that already happened and is safely buried in the past. There is just one problem with it. Daniel's heavenly messenger did not say the fourth beast represented a kingdom that would rise and fall within the first few centuries after Christ. He said it would devour the whole earth. Rome never devoured the whole earth. At its greatest extent, the Roman Empire controlled parts of Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Impressive by ancient standards, but a fraction of the globe. The fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7 is not Rome. It is something Rome could not have imagined. And it is something our generation is the first in history to actually see being constructed. To understand why this beast is categorically different from everything before it, you have to go back to the specific language Daniel uses to describe its physical characteristics. He calls its teeth iron, which connects directly to the iron legs of Nebuchadnezzar's statue, the element associated with crushing force, with overwhelming destruction, with a power that does not negotiate but simply overpowers. But Daniel adds something the statue did not have: bronze claws. Bronze in the ancient world was the metal of precision instruments, of tools designed for deliberate and careful work. Iron crushes indiscriminately. Bronze shapes with intention. The fourth beast does not merely destroy what it encounters, it processes it. It takes what it devours and reshapes it according to a design, reorganizing the conquered material into a new configuration that serves the system's purposes. That combination of iron force and bronze precision is not the description of a military empire in any traditional sense. It is the description of an administrative apparatus, one capable of both overpowering resistance and reorganizing what remains. Then there are the 10 horns, and this detail is where the vision becomes genuinely modern in a way that should stop you cold. In biblical prophecy, horns consistently represent power and authority, kings, rulers, centers of governance. The image of 10 horns on a single beast is the image of a single system operating through 10 distinct seats of authority simultaneously. This is not how empires have traditionally functioned. Empires have capitals, they have emperors or supreme leaders. They have a clear center from which power radiates outward to the periphery. What Daniel describes is something fundamentally different, a distributed architecture of power, where authority is spread across multiple nodes, where no single point of failure can bring the entire structure down. If you remove one horn, 9 remain fully operational. This is not an ancient concept. This is the precise design philosophy behind the most resilient global institutions operating today. International regulatory bodies, multinational financial networks, digital infrastructures built specifically to survive the elimination of any individual component. The beast Daniel described has 10 horns because it was engineered to be indestructible. And then there is the little horn, the detail that Daniel found most disturbing of all. He watches as this new figure emerges from among the 10 existing horns, and in the process, it uproots 3 of them, displacing established centers of power to make room for itself. It has eyes like a human being, suggesting intelligence and calculated perception, and a mouth that speaks boastfully against the highest authority in existence. The heavenly messenger explains that this figure will speak against the Most High and will attempt to change the set times and the laws. Pause on that phrase because it is one of the most specific and consistently overlooked details in all of prophetic scripture. In the ancient Near Eastern world, the one who controlled time controlled reality itself. The festivals, the sacred cycles, the years of Jubilee, the rhythms that ordered all human life under divine authority. To change the set times is to declare that divine law no longer has jurisdiction over human civilization, that a new authority has claimed the right to redefine the fundamental framework of existence. This is not the behavior of a conqueror who wants territory. This is the behavior of an entity that intends to replace God entirely. Now, consider what a global system capable of devouring the whole earth would actually require in practical, operational terms. It would need a mechanism for tracking every human being on the planet, not populations in aggregate, but individuals with unique identifiers that cannot be transferred or duplicated. It would need a framework for controlling access to resources so that no one could participate in economic life without identification and verified compliance with the system's rules. It would need a legal architecture that supersedes national sovereignty, ensuring that no country could simply opt out by changing its own domestic laws. It would need cultural and ideological tools powerful enough to reshape the beliefs and values of entire populations within a single generation. It would need, in other words, precisely what the 21st century has spent the last 3 decades building: biometric identity infrastructure, digital financial systems, international treaty frameworks with binding enforcement mechanisms, and global media ecosystems capable of shaping public consciousness at planetary scale. Not one of these things existed 100 years ago. Every single one of them is fully operational today. The Apostle John, writing in the 1st century after Christ in the book of Revelation, describes a beast with 10 horns and 7 heads. A beast that receives its power and throne and great authority from the dragon himself. A beast that causes all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark without which no one can buy or sell anything at all. John was not writing independently of Daniel. He was completing a picture that Daniel had begun 6 centuries earlier, adding detail and clarity to the same architectural blueprint from a closer historical vantage point. 2 prophets, separated by 600 years, describing the same entity from different angles with complementary details that interlock with the precision of a design document. And Revelation chapter 13 does not present this system as a distant future possibility. It describes something that will be given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation, the whole earth, exactly as Daniel said, not a metaphor, a system. The beast is not a symbol for evil in general. It is not a timeless representation of human sinfulness across all ages and cultures. It is a specific, functional, global architecture of control that will exist at a specific moment in history, that will operate for a defined period, and that will be terminated by a direct divine intervention that Daniel describes with stunning clarity. Daniel saw its shape from 2,600 years away and recorded it with enough precision that we can identify its components today in publicly available documents, technology roadmaps, and international policy frameworks. The question is not whether such a system is theoretically possible. We are watching it assemble itself in real time, with press conferences and treaty signings and product launches that make the front pages of major newspapers. The question Daniel was asking, the question that left him pale and sleepless long after the vision ended, was simpler and more personal than any theological analysis. It was this: what do you do when the beast is no longer coming, but here? That question is no longer hypothetical, and the 7 signals from the last 30 days make it impossible to pretend otherwise. There is a way that historians and analysts talk about world-changing events that makes them feel inevitable only in retrospect. You read about the fall of a civilization, the rise of a totalitarian regime, the collapse of an economy, and somewhere in the account, there is always a moment, a single decision, a single treaty, a single technology that looks small at the time and turns out to be the hinge on which everything turned. The people living through that moment rarely recognize it. They are busy with ordinary life. They are scrolling through their phones, paying their bills, arguing about things that will not matter in 10 years. And the hinge turns quietly, without announcement, in the corridors of institutions most people could not name. That is exactly what has been happening in the last 30 days, not in one place, not in one institution. In 3 separate domains simultaneously, 3 signals appeared that correspond with precision to the specific characteristics Daniel assigned to the 4th beast, not loosely, not metaphorically, with a kind of structural alignment that demands your full attention. The first signal involves identity. In the last 30 days, the push toward a unified global digital identity framework reached a threshold that no previous generation could have approached. The World Bank, in coordination with multiple United Nations agencies, published an updated implementation roadmap for what they are calling foundational digital identity systems, a globally interoperable architecture that would allow any participating government to verify, track, and manage the identity of any individual within its borders using a single standardized digital credential. The language in the document is careful and humanitarian. It speaks of financial inclusion, of access to services for the unbanked, of efficiency and security. But read the technical specifications beneath the policy language and something else emerges. The system is designed to be universal, meaning no individual within a participating nation would exist outside its registry. It is designed to be interoperable, meaning credentials issued in one country would be readable and actionable in every other participating country. And it is designed to be persistent, meaning the record cannot be easily deleted or separated from the individual it represents. Daniel described a beast that would have authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. You cannot exercise that authority without first knowing exactly who every person is. Guard that first signal in your mind, because the second one connects to it directly in a way that should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Also, within the last 30 days, the Bureau for International Settlements, the Central Bank of Central Banks, the institution that coordinates monetary policy among the world's most powerful financial institutions, released a progress report on the development and cross-border testing of central bank digital currencies, commonly called CBDCs. 84% of the world's central banks are now in some stage of researching, piloting, or implementing a fully digital national currency that exists exclusively within a government-controlled ledger. The report details successful interoperability tests conducted between 3 major economic blocs, demonstrating that digital currencies issued by different national central banks can now transact with each other seamlessly in real time without the friction of traditional currency exchange. This is not theoretical. This is a tested, documented operational capability. And here is what distinguishes a central bank digital currency from the money in your wallet or your bank account right now. Every transaction is recorded, every transaction is visible to the issuing authority, and every transaction can be blocked, reversed, or restricted at the discretion of the governing institution. The book of Revelation, chapter 13, says that no one will be able to buy or sell without the mark of the beast. A fully implemented CBDC infrastructure is the first monetary system in human history that is technically capable of enforcing exactly that condition. Now, here is something that most people watching these developments in isolation tend to miss. The first signal and the second signal are not parallel tracks moving independently toward the same destination. They are designed to converge. A digital identity system without a digital currency is just a registry. A digital currency without a universal identity system is just a payment network. But a digital identity system fully integrated with a central bank digital currency creates something qualitatively different from either component alone. It creates a unified control surface, a single interface through which a governing authority can simultaneously verify who you are, what you are permitted to do, and whether you are allowed to participate in the economy at all. The architectural decision to build these two systems with interoperability as a core design requirement is not an accident. It is a blueprint, and it is being executed right now with public funding by institutions whose names appear in newspapers that most people read every day without registering the significance of what is being constructed. The third signal is the one that feels most familiar to people living in Western democracies, because it is arriving through legal and legislative channels that look on the surface like ordinary policy debates. In the last 30 days, 3 separate jurisdictions, one in Europe, one in the United Kingdom, and one in Canada, advanced legislative proposals that would establish new criminal or civil liability for speech that authorities designate as harmful, dangerous, or threatening to social cohesion. The specific language varies by jurisdiction, but the structural pattern is identical in all 3 cases. The proposed laws do not require proof of direct harm. They do not require evidence that the speech in question caused a specific injury to a specific person. They establish liability based on the potential for harm as assessed by a regulatory body empowered to make that determination unilaterally. In practical terms, this means that speech which contradicts the official position of a government agency on matters of chapia, medicine, history, religion, or social policy can be designated harmful and prosecuted accordingly. Speech acts that a regulatory authority decides promote dangerous ideas, including biblical ideas of humanity, about sexuality, about the exclusive claims of the Christian faith, fall squarely within the scope of these proposed frameworks. Daniel's heavenly messenger told him that the little horn would speak against the Most High and oppress the holy people of God. The Greek word used in the Septuagint translation of this passage and echoed in the New Testament's treatment of the same prophecy is the word for wearing down, a slow, grinding attrition rather than a single dramatic blow. This is not the persecution of the Roman Colosseum. This is something more patient, more bureaucratic, and in many ways, more effective. You do not need to throw Christians to lions if you can instead make it economically ruinous to hold Christian beliefs publicly, legally hazardous to teach Christian doctrine, and socially toxic to identify with Christian institutions. 3 signals in 30 days, an identity infrastructure designed to know everyone, a financial infrastructure designed to control everyone, a legal infrastructure designed to silence anyone who refuses to comply. This is not the shadow of the beast approaching from a distance. These are the iron teeth, and they are already closing. There is a sequence to prophetic fulfillment that most people do not recognize because they are looking for dramatic singular events, a single moment when everything changes, a single announcement that the world has crossed a line it cannot uncross. But prophecy does not usually work that way. It works the way a river works, cutting its path gradually, reshaping the landscape so slowly that the people living along its banks barely notice the change until one day they look up and realize the terrain they are standing on bears no resemblance to the world they grew up in. The first 3 signals establish the infrastructure, the identity grid, the financial control surface, and the legal silencing mechanism. But infrastructure is just the skeleton. What fills it with flesh, what makes it operational as a system of genuine dominion over human lives, are the signals that activate it. Signals 4, 5, and 6 are activation events. They are not preparations, they are deployments. And all 3 of them occurred within the same 30-day window in different parts of the world, moving in the same direction with a coordination that no single organizing body has publicly claimed, which is itself a detail worth holding carefully. The fourth signal is the one that Revelation chapter 13 describes with the most visceral specificity, the detail that has haunted Christian readers for 2,000 years, and that secular analysts have dismissed as fantasy until very recently. In the last 30 days, a consortium of financial technology companies operating across 3 continents simultaneously announced the successful completion of a cross-border pilot program for a biometrically authenticated payment system requiring no physical card, no device, and no PIN. The transaction is authenticated by the user's body itself. A vein pattern scan in the hand in one pilot, a facial recognition sequence in another, a subdermal chip implant in the third. The pilot involved over 400,000 active users across participating cities in Asia, Europe, and South America. Transaction success rates exceeded 97%. Fraud rates dropped to a fraction of what card-based systems currently produce. The companies involved published their results with undisguised enthusiasm and announced plans for scaled deployment pending regulatory approval in their respective jurisdictions. Now read Revelation 13, verses 16 and 17, and try to explain why the technology being celebrated in these press releases does not match what John described on the island of Patmos in the 1st century after Christ, a mark on the right hand or the forehead, without which no one can buy or sell. This is where someone always raises the objection. The mark of the beast is a specific spiritual event with specific spiritual conditions, and a biometric payment system is just a technology. That objection is worth taking seriously because it is partially correct. The mark in Revelation carries spiritual significance that goes beyond a payment credential. It represents conscious allegiance to the beast's system and rejection of God's authority. But here is what the objection misses. The technology and the spiritual event are not mutually exclusive. They are sequential. The technology creates the infrastructure through which the spiritual choice will be administered. You cannot force a planetary population to make a conscious choice between 2 allegiances without first building the system that makes that choice enforceable. What the 4th signal represents is not the mark itself. It is the construction of the mechanism through which the mark will one day be the only way to eat. That distinction is important, but it should not be comforting. The 5th signal is the one Daniel pointed to with the phrase that has puzzled scholars for centuries. The little horn with a mouth speaking great things. The figure who exalts himself above every god and speaks astonishing things against the God of gods. In the last 30 days, a sitting head of state, a leader of one of the most influential nations currently shaping the architecture of global governance, delivered a formal address to an international body in which he explicitly claimed that national sovereignty must be subordinated to a new form of planetary authority, that the global challenges facing humanity require a governance structure that transcends the consent of individual nations, and that this new authority must have the power to enforce compliance with its mandates, regardless of what individual governments or their citizens prefer. This is not a new idea in globalist policy circles. Leaders and academics have been floating versions of it for decades. What made this address different? What elevated it from policy proposal to prophetic signal was the specific framing the speaker used. He did not appeal to pragmatism or efficiency. He appealed to destiny. He described the emergence of global governance as a moral and almost sacred obligations, the fulfillment of humanity's highest calling, the next stage in the evolution of human civilization toward its true potential. This is the language of a man who believes he is participating in something transcendent. Daniel said the little horn would speak great things. The Hebrew root behind that phrase, rabban, carries the sense of magnificent self-exaltation, the declaration that one's own authority is ultimate. That is not a policy speech. That is a theological statement wearing a suit. The sixth signal is the most personal of the first six because it does not describe something happening to governments or financial systems. It describes something happening to people, specifically to people who hold biblical faith and refuse to surrender it to the demands of a system that requires total ideological compliance. In the last 30 days, 4 separate legal actions were filed or advanced in Western jurisdictions specifically targeting Christian institutions, a school, a hospital, a church, and a nonprofit organization, not for any act of violence or fraud or concrete harm to an identifiable victim, but for maintaining and expressing beliefs about human identity, sexuality, and the of marriage that contradict current regulatory definitions of acceptable social values. In each case, the legal mechanism being used was not criminal prosecution under existing law, but administrative enforcement under new regulatory frameworks that were not in existence 5 years ago. The institutions did not change. The law changed around them deliberately to make their existing beliefs and practices newly illegal. This is precisely what Daniel's messenger described as wearing down the saints. Not a single dramatic blow, but a sustained administrative grinding that makes faithfulness progressively more costly until the price becomes prohibitive for ordinary people who have jobs to keep and families to feed and mortgages to pay. Think about what these 3 signals look like together. A biometric payment system that authenticates identity through the body itself, piloted across 3 continents and ready for scaled deployment. A world leader speaking in theological terms about the divine mandate for planetary governance that supersedes the consent of nations. A systematic legal campaign that has quietly rewritten the rules to make biblical Christianity a regulatory liability in the countries where it was most free. Each of these, examined alone, can be absorbed, rationalized, filed away. Together, they describe a world that is not moving toward the conditions Daniel prophesied. It is already inside them. The infrastructure is built. The activation is underway. The saints are being worn down exactly as the ancient text said they would be. And there is one signal remaining, the one Daniel described in more detail than any of the others, the one that caused him to mourn for 3 full weeks after the vision ended. That signal appeared in Jerusalem, and it changes everything. Jerusalem has a way of concentrating history. Every empire that has ever reached for global dominion has eventually turned its gaze toward that city, drawn by something that defies purely strategic explanation. The Babylonians came, the Persians came, the Greeks came, the Romans came, the Crusaders came. Napoleon looked at it. The British drew maps of it. And today, in the 21st century, Jerusalem remains the single most contested piece of real estate on the surface of the earth. A city of fewer than 1 million people that generates more international diplomatic activity, more United Nations resolutions, more religious passion, and more prophetic significance than any other location in human history. Daniel understood this. His greatest visions are anchored to Jerusalem and to the Temple Mount specifically. The prophecy of the 70 weeks in Daniel chapter 9 is fundamentally a Jerusalem prophecy. The abomination of desolation that Jesus referenced in Matthew chapter 24 is a Jerusalem event. And the seventh signal, the one that Daniel mourned over for 3 full weeks after receiving it, involves Jerusalem in a way that no previous generation has been positioned to witness until now. To understand the seventh signal, you need to understand what the abomination of desolation actually means in its full prophetic context. The phrase appears first in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, then again in Daniel chapter 11, verse 31, and again in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. Each appearance carries the same core meaning: a desecration of the holy place, a defilement of the sacred space where God's presence was meant to dwell, an act so catastrophically transgressive that it triggers the final sequence of divine judgment. The first historical fulfillment occurred in 168 years before Christ, when the Seleucid king Antiochus IV, who called himself Epiphanes, meaning the manifest God, marched into Jerusalem, entered the temple, erected an altar to Zeus over the altar of burnt offering, and sacrificed a pig on it. The Jewish people called him Antiochus, the madman, instead. But Jesus, speaking 600 years after Daniel and 200 years after Antiochus, said that the abomination of desolation was still coming. He was not referring to something that had already happened. He was pointing forward. He was pointing toward our time. For the abomination of desolation to occur in the way Daniel and Jesus described, a specific physical prerequisite must be in place. There must be a temple, not a metaphorical temple, not a spiritual temple, not a theological concept. A functioning physical temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem with a functioning altar, with functioning priestly rituals, with the full apparatus of Mosaic worship restored to the place where God's name was placed. For approximately 2,000 years, since the Roman general Titus destroyed the Second Temple in 70 years after Christ, that prerequisite has not been met. The Temple Mount has been occupied by the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque since the late 7th century after Christ, making any Jewish construction project on the site not merely politically explosive, but literally impossible without triggering a conflict that could engulf the entire region. Every generation of prophecy students for the last 20 centuries has read Daniel's words about the abomination of desolation and has had to conclude that the final fulfillment was still waiting on that one seemingly immovable obstacle. Then something happened in the last 30 days that moved it. A senior rabbi in Jerusalem, one of the most respected figures in the movement dedicated to rebuilding the temple, a man whose name carries weight in both religious and political circles in Israel, made a public declaration that received almost no coverage in Western media, but traveled at extraordinary speed through Jewish religious communities and through the network of prophecy-focused Christian scholars who monitor such statements closely. He declared, with the specificity of a man announcing a building permit rather than a theological opinion, that every halachic and practical requirement for the construction of the third temple has now been satisfied. The priestly garments have been made. The sacred vessels have been reconstructed according to the specifications in Exodus and the Talmud. A red heifer, the animal whose ashes are required by Numbers chapter 19 for the purification of the priests before temple service can begin, has been identified, examined, and certified as meeting all the biblical criteria for the first time in 2,000 years. The Levitical priests have been identified through DNA and genealogical records and are being trained. The architectural plans are complete. The only remaining obstacle, the rabbi said, is political permission. And political permission in a region where the balance of power is shifting faster than at any point in living memory is a variable, not a fixed barrier. Now, hold that statement next to what happened simultaneously at the United Nations in the same 30-day window. A proposal was formally submitted, not by Israel, which is the detail that makes this remarkable, but by a coalition of nations calling for an internationally supervised shared governance arrangement for the Temple Mount, one that would theoretically allow for the construction of a Jewish house of worship in a designated area of the compound without requiring the removal of existing Islamic structures. The proposal was framed in the language of religious pluralism and conflict resolution. It was presented as a humanitarian initiative aimed at reducing tensions rather than inflaming them. It was rejected in the initial vote, but the procedural record shows that it received support from a larger coalition of nations than any previous proposal of its kind has ever attracted. The framework exists. The support base is measurable and growing. The political architecture for what was previously considered an impossible arrangement is being built in plain sight through ordinary diplomatic channels by people who may not realize they are fulfilling a prophecy that is 2,600 years old. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 through 16, "When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." The parenthetical instruction is striking. Let the reader understand. It is an unusual insertion, a moment where the narrative voice breaks through and addresses the audience directly, acknowledging that what is being described requires active comprehension, not passive reception. Jesus was not speaking to the generation sitting in front of him in the first century. He was speaking to the generation that would be alive when these specific, identifiable conditions came together. The red heifer, certified. The priestly vessels, reconstructed. The political framework for temple construction entering formal international deliberation. All of this in the same 30-day period as the digital identity infrastructure, the CBDC interoperability tests, the global governance speech, the legal campaign against the saints, and the biometric payment pilots. 7 signals, 1 month, 1 ancient text, and a man who fell on his face by a river and wept because he understood, even without living to see it, exactly what it would mean when the calendar finally arrived at this page. Daniel's vision does not end with the beast. That is the detail that gets lost when people focus exclusively on the terror of what rises from the sea, when the iron teeth and the bronze claws and the 10 horns absorb all the attention and the second half of the vision fades into the background. The beast is not the final image. The beast is not the last word. Daniel chapter 7, beginning at verse 9, pivots with the sudden and overwhelming authority of a courtroom being called to order. And what Daniel sees next is not more darkness. It is a throne. Thrones, actually. Multiple thrones set in place, and one throne above all others, blazing with fire, its wheels burning, a river of fire flowing from before it, and seated on that throne is a figure Daniel calls the Ancient of Days. White garments, white hair like pure wool, a presence so absolute that 10,000 times 10,000 stand before him in attendance. The court is convened, the books are opened, and the fourth beast, for all its iron teeth and its boasting mouth and its dominion over the whole earth, is stripped of its power, its body destroyed, and given over to the burning fire. This is where Daniel's vision ends, not with the beast triumphant, with the beast judged. The reason this matters, the reason it is not merely a comforting theological footnote to append at the end of a disturbing analysis, is that the judgment scene is not presented as a future hope disconnected from the events Daniel described earlier. It is presented as the direct and inevitable consequence of those events. The beast rises. The beast speaks great things. The beast wages war against the saints. And then the Ancient of Days sits, and judgment is given in favor of the saints of the Most High. And the time comes for the saints to possess the kingdom. The sequence is not interrupted. It is not delayed indefinitely. The same passage that describes the 3.5 years of the little horn's dominion also describes its termination. Daniel was not shown a system of evil that runs forever. He was shown a system of evil that runs for a defined period and then meets a judge who is seated before the foundations of the world were laid and who will still be seated when the last page of human history is turned. But here is the tension that the vision leaves unresolved, deliberately, uncomfortably, and with full pastoral intention. Between the moment we are in now and the moment the Ancient of Days executes final judgment, there is a period that Daniel describes as the most intense compression of evil, deception, and suffering in human history. Jesus called it a tribulation greater than anything that has occurred since the beginning of the world until now, and said that if those days were not cut short, no living thing would survive them. The Apostle Paul described a man of lawlessness who will exalt himself above every so-called God, who will seat himself in the temple of God and declare himself to be God. The book of Revelation describes the full activation of everything the 7 signals are currently preparing. A world in which the choice between the mark and starvation is not theoretical, but immediate, daily, and inescapable. The vision ends well. The path to that ending does not spare those who walk it. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling a version of prophecy that Daniel himself would not recognize. So, what does a person do with this? What is the appropriate response to standing at the convergence point of 7 prophetic signals, reading a 2,600-year-old text that describes your world with the accuracy of a blueprint, and understanding that the sequence Daniel was shown is not approaching its beginning, but approaching its middle? The first response is clarity. Stop pretending that what is being built around you is neutral. The digital identity grid, the cashless payment infrastructure, the global governance architecture, the legal dismantling of religious freedom. These are not separate policy debates to be evaluated on their individual merits by reasonable people of good faith. They are components of a system whose ultimate purpose is total dominion over human life. And that system has an architect who is not human and whose intentions toward humanity are not benevolent. Clarity does not require panic. It requires honesty. And the first act of honesty is calling the thing by its right name. The second response is the one that Daniel himself modeled in a way that the text records with quiet power. After the vision ended, after the 3 weeks of mourning, after the physical weakness and the pale face and the troubled thoughts, Daniel got up and went back to work. He continued serving. He continued praying. He continued speaking the word he had been given to speak, even in a foreign city, even under a government that did not share his faith, even knowing what was coming. He did not retreat into isolation. He did not abandon his post because the darkness was deepening. He understood something that the vision itself teaches if you read it carefully enough. The beast is given dominion, but it is given dominion for a season, and seasons end. The Ancient of Days does not rush. He does not panic. He is not surprised by any development on earth, not by the 10 horns, not by the little horn, not by the boasting mouth or the iron teeth or the campaign against the saints. He sits. He opens the books. He judges. The outcome is not in question. What is in question is what you do between now and then. The third response is the one that prophecy has always been designed to produce in the people who receive it with honesty and humility. Not fear, not fatalism, not the paralysis of someone who looks at the size of what is coming and concludes that nothing they do could possibly matter. The response prophecy is designed to produce is decision. A clear, conscious, irreversible decision about where your allegiance sits when the system that is being built around you demands total compliance. Daniel made that decision before Nebuchadnezzar's furnace. His 3 companions made it before the flames. Every generation of believers has faced its own version of that threshold, and every generation has discovered that the God who sat on the throne in Daniel's vision was present in the fire, walking with the ones who refused to bow. The 4th beast is here. The signals are lit. The court is convening. And the only question that has ever mattered, the only question that will matter when the books are opened and every name is read aloud, is not whether you saw it coming. It is what you did when you did.